Imagine you are sitting in a very big, very old classroom. In the front of the room is the teacher, who is like the king. Everyone is looking at the loud kids in the back who are making a mess and getting into trouble. You know those kids, the ones who always have their names in the news or are arguing with their parents. But then you look at the very quiet kid sitting in the front row. This kid has always been nice. He always does his homework. He never gets in trouble. He is so quiet that sometimes people forget he is even there. But suddenly, that quiet kid stands up. He is holding a very thick folder full of secret papers. He walks up to the teacher's desk and says, "Excuse me, but this desk and all the chairs in this room actually belong to me." Everyone stops talking. The room gets so silent you could hear a tiny bug crawl across the floor. This is exactly what is happening right now in the British royal family. The quiet kid is Prince Edward. He has been watching and waiting for a very long time. And now he has brought his lawyers to tell his big brother, King Charles, that he wants what belongs to him. It is a story about big castles, secret letters from a long time ago, and a brotherly fight over millions and millions of dollars. Get ready, because the royal family is about to change forever. King Charles recently gave his youngest brother, Prince Edward, a very special and important new name. He named him the Duke of Edinburgh. This is a very big deal because that special name used to belong to their father, Prince Philip. Prince Philip had that name for a very long time, more than 70 years. Before Prince Philip died, he said that he really wanted his youngest son, Edward, to have that name after he was gone. Prince Edward said that getting this new name was a bit of a shock to his system. Even if a person tries very hard to get ready for something big like that, it is still a very big surprise. He said it was very, very sad to think about his father being gone, and the whole family is still trying to feel better and come to terms with the loss. The British royal family is very old, and they have had many problems over the years. They have seen kings quit their jobs and leave the palace. They have seen people get mad at each other and get divorced. They have had many stories written about them in the newspapers that were very mean. Any other family would have been ruined by all that trouble, but the royal family stayed together through everything. They stayed strong when the famous Princess Diana died. They even stayed together when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle decided to move away to America. But nothing that has happened before is quite like the big problem they are facing right now. This time, the trouble is not about someone being loud or acting wild. This time, the trouble is something the palace never learned how to handle. The threat this time is coming from very serious lawyers. These are people who know everything about the law and how money works. These lawyers are carrying very serious folders full of very serious papers. They are telling the world that King Charles is keeping things that do not actually belong to him. They are saying that he has money and property that should legally be for his brother, Prince Edward. The people who work inside the palace are staying awake at night because they are so worried about this. These lawyers are not working for the people who usually cause a lot of noise, like Harry or Andrew. They are working for the one royal person that everyone thought would never cause a single bit of trouble. They are working for Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. He's the youngest son of the late Queen Elizabeth. For a very long time, the people in the palace thought he was the quiet one who would always do exactly what he was told. He was the one who kept his head down and never tried to be more famous than anyone else. But now, Edward's team of lawyers has written a formal letter. They say that Edward is supposed to get tens of millions of pounds. That is so much money it is hard to even imagine. They say this money belongs to him because of his special title as the Duke of Edinburgh. They say it became his the very moment his mother, the Queen, gave him that title. These lawyers say that after the Queen died, King Charles quietly took all that money and put it into his own big pile of royal wealth. They say he acted like that money did not even exist for anyone else. The palace was not expecting Edward to stand up for himself like this. They are not doing a good job of handling the news. This is a very big fight over an inheritance. An inheritance is what a person gets from their parents after they pass away. This might be the biggest fight over an inheritance that anyone alive today can remember. It could change the way everyone understands royal houses and royal names forever under the rules of the law. Before we can really understand this giant legal earthquake, we have to understand the man at the center of it all. Prince Edward used to have the name Earl of Wessex for most of his life. Now he is the Duke of Edinburgh. For a long time, he tried very hard to make sure nobody noticed him. He was intentionally forgettable. He almost wanted people to look at his siblings instead of him. Think about all the big fights the royal family has had. When you think of a king quitting his job, you think of an old king named Edward. When you think of people getting divorced, you think of Charles and Diana. When you think of big international scandals, you think of Prince Andrew. And when you think of people being unhappy with the royal family and moving away, you think of Harry and Meghan. Harry and Meghan even made movies about their lives from a big house in California. But Prince Edward is almost never in those big conversations. He started a training program for the Royal Marines back in 1987, but he did not finish it. The newspapers liked to talk about that for a little while, but then he moved on to making television shows. He started a small company to make TV programs. He married a lady named Sophie in 1999. Their wedding was very nice and warm, but it was not a giant, fancy show like his brother's weddings. Edward just did his job. He went to all the meetings he was supposed to go to. He smiled for all the pictures. He gave speeches at events. But he never sold his secrets to the newspapers. He never sat down for a big TV interview to tell everyone his private feelings. He did not have any enemies, and he did not do anything wild to get his name in the headlines. For many years, the only thing the newspapers could say about him was that he was not very interesting. If you try to think back, you probably cannot remember a single big news story about Prince Edward by himself. He was always just there in the background, standing next to his much more famous family members. Being invisible like that was not an accident. Edward chose to be that way. It was a very smart choice that gave him many rewards. Most people did not realize that when you spend 30 years being overlooked, you get very good at watching other people. You get very good at listening to what is being said in the halls. You start to understand exactly how big groups like the royal family work. You learn all the secrets and all the legal rules. Prince Edward was watching and listening this whole time. Somewhere around the end of the year 2023, he decided it was finally time to speak up and take action. To understand what Edward's lawyers found, you have to understand his new name, the Duke of Edinburgh. It is not just a fancy label or a special hat. It is a legal instrument. That means it is like a set of rules that comes with a lot of power and money. The name Duke of Edinburgh has a very strange history. Over hundreds of years, it has been given to people, taken away, and then given again. The most important part of the story started in 1947. That was when King George VI gave the name to a young man in the Navy named Philip Mountbatten. This happened right before Philip married the lady who would become Queen Elizabeth. It would be easy to think that the king just gave Philip a nice title because he was marrying his daughter. You might think it was just a nice wedding gift. And while it was a kind thing to do, the legal papers said much more than that. The papers that made Philip the Duke of Edinburgh were very carefully written. They were not just scribbled down on a piece of paper. They were built by very smart lawyers who worked for the royals. These papers had very specific rules. They said that the title came with rights and money that stayed with the title, no matter who was holding it at the time. These documents were written to last for a very long time. They were written by people who knew that titles like this would move from parents to children across many generations. When Prince Philip died in April of 2021, the title of Duke of Edinburgh became temporarily empty. This is a normal thing that happens in the law. The title goes back to the crown, which means it goes back to the king or queen. Then the king or queen has to decide what to do with it. They can get rid of it, keep it for themselves, or give it to someone else. What happened next was very kind, but it also became a big legal problem. Queen Elizabeth, in the last years of her life, told everyone that she wanted Edward to have the title next. This was not a secret. Everyone in the royal circle talked about it. The newspapers in Britain wrote about it. Everyone knew that the Queen wanted Edward to carry his father's title forward. She wanted someone she could really trust to hold the name with the same respect that Philip had given it. On her big celebration called the Platinum Jubilee in 2022, she made it official. Edward and his wife Sophie became the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. It was a very sweet gesture from a mother to her son. But here is what the palace seems to have forgotten or missed. When the Queen gave Edward that title, she was not just giving him a new name to use at parties. Because of those old papers from 1947, she was also giving him a set of legal rights and money. These rights were tied to the name of the Duke of Edinburgh. According to the rules of English property law, these rights did not just disappear when Prince Philip died. They did not start over from zero when Edward got the title. They stayed with the title itself. They followed the name from Philip to Edward like a shadow. In the year 2023, Edward's lawyers sat down to look at every single paper. They looked at the original documents from 1947. They looked at the trusts, which are like special banks for the family's wealth. They looked at the plans Philip had made for his money. They looked at the papers that gave the title to Edward. What they found inside those papers was absolutely amazing. It was not at all what King Charles thought. Let's talk about what the papers actually say. because the small details are where the real power is in this story. When Queen Elizabeth died in September of 2022, everyone thought all her land went to the new king. But two of the most famous places the royals own are a bit different. Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle are crown properties. That means they belong to the office of the king. They belong to the country, not to any one person. No king or queen can ever sell Buckingham Palace or give it away in a will. It stays with the crown no matter who is the boss. But two other places, Balmoral and Sandringham, are not like that. They are private property. Balmoral Castle is in a place called Scotland. It was bought by Prince Albert, who was Queen Victoria's husband, in 1852. He bought it with his own money. Sandringham House is in a place called Norfolk. It was bought by King Edward VII in 1862 when he was the Prince of Wales. He also used his own private money to buy it. Ever since then, these two giant estates have been private homes. They are passed down from one person to the next in a private will, just like a normal person might leave a house to their children. This is very important for the law. Private property is different from crown property. You can put special rules on private property. You can say that someone has the right to live there or get money from it even after the owner dies. These rules can bind the next person who owns the land. Unlike the crown assets, these private estates have to follow ordinary English property laws, and the law does not care if you are a king or a regular person. The law says everyone has to follow the rules. All royal wills are usually kept secret, but the legal papers for titles are not always invisible. When Edward's lawyers looked at the papers, they found very clear rules. They found instructions that said the Duke of Edinburgh is supposed to get specific money and rights from these estates. They found a rule that said the Duke has a reversionary interest. That is a fancy legal term. It means he has a legal right to the land that stays with his title. It is not just a nice suggestion that the king can ignore. It is a legal right that binds the next owner. Edward's lawyers say that these rights did not stop when Philip died. They stayed alive and attached themselves to Edward when he became the new Duke. In the world of property law, this means Edward has a real claim to the money and the land. He has a right that exists no matter who is living in the castle. This is even true if the person living there is the King of England himself. This is where the story goes from being interesting to being like an explosion. In the months after the Queen died, King Charles worked very fast. He wanted to get all the royal business organized under his own control. This is what most kings do when they start their new job. They want to make sure everything is running smoothly. Charles made some very big decisions about Sandringham. He changed how the house was managed. He changed how the money from the farms on the land was spent. He also made big plans for the Balmoral estate in Scotland. He decided how to grow the trees there and how to use the smaller houses on the property. He moved a lot of money into a special royal bank called the Duchy of Lancaster. These were very big choices involving assets worth hundreds of millions of pounds. But according to the people who know Edward's side of the story, Charles made these choices without checking the rules for the Duke of Edinburgh title. He did not stop to ask if his younger brother had a legal stake in all that money and land. Edward's lawyers now say the answer is yes. They say the palace lawyers made a big mistake. They assumed that the rules for the Duke of Edinburgh were just for show and could not be enforced. They might have thought that when Philip died, all his rights died with him. They might have thought that Edward just got a nice name and nothing else. Or maybe they just moved too fast and did not do their homework correctly. By the time Edward's lawyers finished their work at the end of 2023, they had a very strong argument. They say that King Charles made choices that were legally premature. That means he acted too soon. He did not account for the rights that Edward got the moment he became the Duke. When this message was delivered to the palace, it was very polite and professional. But it was also devastating. It was like a big rock being thrown into a quiet pond. The palace had a very big reaction to the news. When a big group like the royal family gets a legal challenge that they think is wrong, they usually say so right away. They tell everyone that the challenge is silly and they go back to work. But what does a group do when they are not sure they can win? They go very, very quiet, and that is exactly what the palace did. They went silent. At first, they decided to keep the fight a secret. They wanted to keep it between the lawyers. They thought it was too complicated for normal people to understand. They thought the newspapers would not be able to figure it out. People who watch the royals for a living noticed that something was different. Usually, the palace press office is very busy. They are always talking to reporters and trying to make the royal family look good. But they stopped talking about anything to do with Edward's money or the big royal estates. This is not how the palace acts when they are sure of themselves. They only act this way when they are worried. The next thing they did was start secret negotiations. This means the lawyers for the king and the lawyers for the prince started talking in private. These were not nice family chats over a cup of tea. These were very serious legal meetings about what the documents meant. They were talking about how much money Edward was owed and what rights he had. The most alarming thing was that the palace started doing its own research very quickly. They were trying to see if their own lawyers had made a mistake. They were re-examining the papers they thought were already settled. You do not scramble to check the law unless you are worried you might have broken it. People also noticed that Charles and Edward were not hanging out as much as they used to. They were not going to events together as often. They did not look as happy and brotherly when the cameras were around. Edward and his wife Sophie still did their royal jobs very well, but things felt cold. Everyone involved in the fight knew that one wrong word could cause a giant problem in court. This is not how a family acts when they are happy and everything is fine. This is how they act when they are in a legal war. Let's stop talking about big ideas and talk about real money. The amount of money we are talking about is huge. The Sandringham estate in the countryside is about 20,000 acres. That is a giant piece of land. The main house is very famous, but the real money comes from the rest of the land. Sandringham has many working farms, big forests for wood, and businesses that sell crops. It makes a lot of money every year from farming and from people who come to visit. Some experts say the whole estate is worth between 50 million and 200 million pounds. The Balmoral estate in Scotland is even bigger than Sandringham. It is 50,000 acres of beautiful mountains and fields. It has the castle, many smaller houses, and places where people pay to go hunting. It also has big forests and farms. Most people think it is worth more than 100 million pounds. Both of these places were private gifts from Queen Elizabeth. They both have secret rules that the public has never been allowed to see, and there is more than just land. There are special payments tied to titles that have been building up for many decades. The Duke of Edinburgh title is exactly the kind of name that has these special rules attached to it. Queen Elizabeth gave it to Edward in a very personal way. We are not just talking about a nice apartment or a small allowance of pocket money. We are talking about rights worth hundreds of millions of pounds. It seems like King Charles thought all that money just became his when the Queen died. But Edward's lawyers say that money was never the King's to take. If these lawyers are right, it means the King has been managing money that does not belong to him for more than 2 years. It is very important to understand what Prince Edward is actually saying. He is not trying to be the king. He does not want to take his brother's job. He is not trying to change who is next in line for the throne. He is not like Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. He is not going to write a book about his feelings or make a movie about how the palace is mean. Edward has not said anything to the public about this, and he probably never will. His lawyers are making a very specific and narrow argument about the law. They are saying that the special rules for the Duke of Edinburgh give Edward legal rights to specific money and land. They say these rights stay with the title no matter who has it. They say a king cannot just decide to get rid of these rights. Even the most powerful king has to follow the property laws of England. The main idea is called a binding charge. In the law, this means a legal obligation that stays with a piece of property, no matter who owns it next. It follows the land like a rule that cannot be broken. Edward's lawyers are saying that when the Queen gave him the title, those rights were part of the deal. They say the king should have admitted that Edward had a stake in the property before he started moving things around. This is not an argument about feelings or a brother being mean. It is an argument about what is written on the papers and what those signatures mean. The palace cannot just ignore this. They are doing secret research and backroom deals because they know the argument is very strong. This story is more than just a royal soap opera for people to watch on TV. It is not just about a family that cannot get along. While the human part is very interesting, 2 brothers fighting over a mother's gift, the story is actually much bigger. We live in a time when people are starting to lose trust in big groups like governments and churches. They are also starting to lose trust in the royal family. The monarchy has survived for a long time by being a bit mysterious. They did not want people to see how everything worked on the inside. But now that mystery is being taken away. When Harry and Meghan left, it showed that the family's discipline was not perfect. It showed that family members could talk to the public and that people might believe them instead of the palace. The world saw how much wealth the royals have during the pandemic. People started asking questions about where all their money comes from and how they spend it. And now, Edward's legal team is stepping into that world with their bags full of letters and papers. They are using the rules of English property law to make an argument that hurts the monarchy's old ways. They are showing that tradition is not a good excuse to break the law. They are showing that the king's choices about money can be challenged in court. They are showing that even kings have to follow what is written in a contract. Experts who study the law say this raises questions about all royal property. They wonder if the palace has been following the rules correctly for all their other lands and titles over the years. There are three ways this fight could end. Each one would be a very big deal. The first way, and the one that is most likely, is a quiet settlement. This is how the royals like to fix things. They do it behind closed doors so nobody knows exactly what happened. They find a way to make everyone happy, and then they act like everything is perfect. In this scenario, the king would admit Edward is right in private. He would give Edward the money or the rights he wants, but he would not tell the public. The palace would say that the family loves each other very much and that everyone is happy. Edward and Sophie would keep doing their royal work. Charles would stay the king. But somewhere in a secret folder at a law firm, there would be a paper that says the king was wrong about the law. Even this quiet ending is a big deal. It means the legal argument was so strong that the king could not just ignore it. It means someone stood up to a king and won because they had the right papers. Second way it could end is with a real court case. This would be like a giant explosion. It is not very likely, but it could happen. If the brothers cannot agree, they might have to go to a judge. This would be a disaster for the royal family. It would be very embarrassing for everyone. A judge would have to look at the secret royal papers and decide who is right. The lawyers would have to show documents that the palace has kept secret for hundreds of years. This would happen for the whole world to see on the news. The reputation of the royal family would be hurt very badly. This is why they will try very hard to settle the fight in private. But the fact that a court case is even possible is a huge change. It shows that the invisible prince has a very strong case. You do not get the king to hire a team of lawyers unless you have a very real threat. The third way it could end is with a giant review of all royal property rules. The questions Edward is asking might be too big to hide under a rug. The government might start to pay attention. For a long time, the royals have been allowed to keep their property business a secret. They said they needed to do this because of tradition. But they were only allowed to stay secret because nobody ever challenged them before. Prince Edward's lawyers have shown that they can be challenged. They have shown that the rules can be examined. If they can hold a king accountable for one title, they might be able to do it for everything else. Once the government starts looking, they do not stop easily. Let's think about Prince Edward one more time. He spent his whole life trying to be an ordinary guy. Even people who really like the royals might not have been able to guess he would do this. He was the brother that nobody wrote books about. He was the royal that nobody made movies about. In a family full of big stars and loud drama, he wanted to be the one who was not memorable. He was the quiet one. But while Charles was busy being king, and Andrew was in trouble, and Harry was in America, Edward was watching. He was reading the old papers. He was learning exactly what his mother gave him when she made him the Duke of Edinburgh. She gave him a title, but she also gave him a legal weapon. It was a carefully written document that gave him real rights. Those rights did not go away when the Queen died. They stayed with the title, and it seems the most powerful man in the country forgot about those rights when he made his big decisions. Edward's lawyers did their homework. They spent months looking at every single document. They wrote a formal, professional letter that was legally devastating. The palace got that letter and they did not know what to do. They hired their own lawyers and started a big scramble to find an answer. Something has changed between the two brothers. The quiet one has finally spoken. He did not use a camera or a TV show. He used the law. He used a methodical and precise legal argument that cuts through all the fancy ceremonies. He found a simple and uncomfortable truth. The Queen wanted Edward to have these things, and she wrote it down. The royal family says that tradition is the most important thing, but now they are being held accountable by their very own traditions. It is not a rebel or an outsider who is doing this. It is their own legal papers. History usually remembers the loud people who broke the rules and made a scene, but sometimes it is the quiet people who change things the most. The palace always thought Edward was the one they did not have to worry about. They were wrong for a very long time. This story is just getting started, and it is going to be very interesting to see what happens next. Do you think the king will settle the fight quietly, or will it go to court? Tell me what you think in the comments. This is a big story that everyone should know about.